Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, whenever this gets released. My name is Agustin Funes, and this is my U.S. Immigration History Timeline project. Well, this is the timeline walkthrough video. This is going to be me explaining briefly describing the 5 events on my timeline. We will go over each of the 5 time periods, and yeah, here we will begin.
And now, our feature presentation.
My first event is from the timeline 1790 to 1879, and I'll be discussing the Nationality Act of 1790. It is the first U.S. law to define who would become a naturalized citizen. This excluded enslaved Africans, Native Americans, and most non-European immigrants. The reason I chose this event was because it was one of the first ones that happened, from what I remember, and it set a tone for a racial hierarchy in American law society. I believe this is like when it started to happen, so which is why I chose it. I chose it because it was the beginning. It was the one I wanted to start off with. For the time period of 1880 and 1921, I chose the Immigration Act of 1882, and this law created the first comprehensive federal immigration restrictions, and it pretty much imposed a head tax on new arrivals to America, and also bearing undesirable immigrants, including convicts, lunatics, and those likely to become public charges. The reason I chose this one was because it coincided with growing nativism and fears that immigrants were a burden. So pretty much, I felt this one was pretty important to show that these laws back then were pretty unfair, and over time they slowly got a bit more accepting and more fair. But I chose this one since this was back then when laws were really, really harsh during that time. For the 1922 and 1964 time period, I chose the Immigration Act of 1924, which is the Johnson-Reed Act. This is a pretty famous one. This act established strict national origin quotas, heavily favoring immigrants from Northern and Western Europe, while severely limiting those from Southern and Eastern Europe, and banning all immigration from Asia. Pretty much, it institutionalized racial and ethnic preferences in immigration policy. And I chose it because it pretty much reflects the influence of eugenics and nativist fears about undesirable immigrants changing American society. So I thought that one was really important for this, and as I said before, it pretty much it just reflected just the fears about the undesirable immigrants and how they could change the American society pretty much. We are nearing the end, so for this one is 1965 and 1990. And I chose Plyer versus Doe, 1982. That is this law. And the Supreme Court ruled that states could not deny free public education to undocumented children. I chose it for the obvious reason. It was significant in affirming that the Equal Protection Clause applies to all people, not just citizens, and socially reflected the tensions over undocumented immigration and debates about public resources, especially in states in growing immigrant populations. And it was a pretty important one, and I felt like it was a pretty fair one, honestly, in my personal opinion, because the state could not deny free public education, which is good. It's good for all people. And sadly, we are reaching the very end. It is 1991 today, and the one I chose was the Homeland Security Act for 2002. This act was passed after the 9/11 attacks, and it created the Department of Homeland Security, and it moved immigration enforcement under its control, splitting functions among agencies like ICE, CBP, and USCIS. And it was significant for linking immigration more directly to national security policy. And I chose it for that reason, and also because it reflected post 9/11 fears and a heightened focus on counterterrorism, which I thought was really important during that time, that really hard time in some people's life. And that concludes my my timeline project. And what I learned from the timeline project, I pretty much learned that laws back then were pretty harsh when it came to immigration. But over time, when more acts and more laws were created, it made America much more fair, I would say, back then. I feel like nowadays it's a bit more iffy on the sides, but I feel like doing this timeline, I got to learn more about the law side of America and its history, and it really helped me see the bigger picture about things that are going on currently. So I thank this class for that. So, and thank you for listening, and hopefully you learned something from this. And if you didn't, well, I apologize, but if you did, thank you, and have a good day.